The sun was setting over the red earth of Abumi when the drums began to beat, a low, throbbing rhythm that echoed through the palm groves like the heartbeat of a dying giant. It was 1818, and in the heart of West Africa, a new king was about to rise from the shadows of betrayal. His name was Gizo, and he had just overthrown his own brother, Adandazan, the king who had dared to dream of peace. Adandazan had tried to end the endless wars, to stop the raids that fed the kingdom's hunger for slaves and blood. But Gizo saw weakness in mercy. He locked his brother in a dark hut, left him to rot in chains, and seized the throne with the help of Portuguese slave traders who whispered promises of gold and guns. From that day on, the kingdom of Dahomey would become a machine of terror, and Gizo its merciless engineer. Gizo was no ordinary man. Tall, with skin like polished ebony and eyes that burned like coals in a forge, he moved through his palace like a panther stalking prey. He wore robes dyed in the blood-red ochre of the earth, and around his neck hung a necklace of human teeth, teeth taken from the first enemies he had killed as a young warrior. His voice was soft, almost gentle when he spoke to foreigners, but to his people, it was the crack of a whip. He rebuilt the army, forging it into a blade of iron and fear. And at its tip were the Mino, the Amazon warriors, women trained from childhood to kill without hesitation, their bodies scarred from climbing walls of thorns, their hands stained from executing prisoners in the dead of night. But Gizo's true power came from the raids. He looked north to the lands of the Mahi people, peaceful farmers and herders who lived in scattered villages along the plateau, their homes made of mud and thatch, their lives tied to the rhythms of the seasons. The Mahi had no great army, no walls like Abumi's. They were perfect prey. In 1823, just 5 years into his reign, Gizo launched his first great expedition against them. 20,000 warriors marched under the Dahomey banners, banners sewn from the hides of lions and elephants, embroidered with scenes of victory and death. The Amazons led the way, silent as ghosts, their machetes sharp enough to split a hair. The Mahi never saw them coming. The Dahomey army struck at dawn, when the mist still clung to the ground like a shroud. Villages burned. Men were cut down as they ran for their spears. Women screamed as they were dragged from their huts, their children ripped from their arms. The chiefs of the Mahi, proud leaders with names like Igonglo and Kpajito, fought bravely, but bravery means little against numbers and steel. By sunset, Gizo's forces had captured thousands. Warriors bound in ropes, chiefs in iron chains, wives and daughters herded like cattle. The king himself rode into the smoking ruins of the largest Mahi village, his horse stepping over bodies as if they were fallen leaves. He dismounted, looked at the trembling chief kneeling before him, and smiled. "You fought well," Gizo said. "But now you belong to Dahomey." The march back to Abumi was a trail of tears and blood. The prisoners were yoked together with wooden collars, their feet blistered from the hot sand, their backs lashed by the Amazons' whips. The wives of the chiefs walked with their heads bowed, clutching their daughters' hands, whispering prayers to gods who seemed to have forsaken them. Gizo rode at the front, his generals counting the captives like merchants tallying goods. Some would be sold to the white traders on the coast, Portuguese, British, French, who waited with ships full of guns and rum. But the best, the strongest, the most noble, they were reserved for something far worse. They were for the annual customs, the great ritual where Gizo honored his ancestors with the ultimate gift, human life. The annual customs were Gizo's masterpiece of terror, a festival that lasted days and turned Abumi into a carnival of death. Every year, under the blazing sun, the king would parade through the streets on a throne carried by slaves, his body oiled and gleaming, his crown heavy with gold. The people cheered, but their cheers were edged with fear, for they knew what came next. The prisoners from the Mahi raids were brought out first. The chiefs and their warriors, stripped naked, their bodies painted with white clay to mark them as offerings. Their wives and daughters were forced to watch from cages woven from thorn branches, their faces pressed against the spines until blood trickled down their cheeks. Gizo sat on his throne in the great square, surrounded by his Amazons, who stood like statues of vengeance, their eyes empty of pity. The first sacrifice was always a chief. One by one they were dragged forward. The king would rise, draw his ceremonial knife, a blade forged from the iron of captured guns, and approached the kneeling man. With a swift motion, he would slice off the chief's ears, holding them up to the crowd as blood poured down the prisoner's neck. The man screamed, but the drums drowned him out. Then the nose, cut clean with a flick of the wrist, the cartilage crunching like dry wood. The crowd roared approval. But Gizo wasn't done. He would force the bleeding chief to open his mouth, and into it he shoved the severed pieces, commanding, "Eat of your own strength, for it now belongs to me." The chief, choking on his own flesh and blood, would be left to swallow or die trying, while his wife and daughters wailed from their cages. This was no idle cruelty. It was ritual, rooted in the belief that by consuming their own power, the enemies could never rise against Dahomey in the afterlife. One Mahi chief, a giant of a man named Yovo, resisted. He spat the pieces at Gizo's feet and cursed the king in his native tongue. Gizo laughed, a sound like thunder rolling over the savannah. "Then let the fire cook it for you," he said. Yovo was thrown onto a pyre of green wood, the flames slow and smoky, roasting him alive as he howled. His wife, forced to watch, fainted, only to be revived with buckets of water so she could see the end. His daughters, barely teens, were pulled from the cage and handed to the Amazons as gifts, to be trained as warriors or used as slaves in the palace, their lives forever broken. For 3 days the sacrifices continued. 82 Mahi subchiefs met the same fate, their ears and noses cut, their bodies mutilated, their last breath spent in agony. The king kept the head chief alive the longest, chaining him to a post in the square, making him witness every death, every scream from his people. On the 3rd day, when the air reeked of blood and charred flesh, Gizo approached with his knife. The chief begged for mercy, not for himself but for his family. Gizo leaned close and whispered, "Mercy is for the weak. Your blood will build my empire." With that, he slit the chief's throat, catching the spurting blood in a golden bowl. The head was severed, cleaned, and later turned into a drinking cup, engraved with the chief's name so Gizo could sip palm wine from it and mock his enemy's spirit. But the horror didn't end with the knife. The bodies of the sacrificed were thrown into a pit outside the city, where vultures circled like black omens. Their heads were collected, boiled clean, and used to pave the alley leading to Gizo's private hut, a path of skulls and jawbones that crunched underfoot, a reminder to all who entered that Dahomey was built on death. And the palace itself? Recent discoveries have revealed its darkest secret. The walls were mixed with human blood, the mortar red with the life of victims, binding the bricks in a curse that protected the king from evil spirits. Scientists confirmed it just last year. Traces of hemoglobin from dozens of sacrificed prisoners, their essence woven into the very stones of power. The wives and daughters of the Mahi chiefs fared no better. Many were distributed to the Amazons as personal slaves, forced to serve the women who had killed their husbands and fathers. Others were sacrificed in later rituals, their throats cut to fill more bowls, their blood poured over the ancestors' altars. One story, whispered by survivors who escaped to neighboring lands, tells of a Mahi princess named Afi. She was the daughter of a chief, beautiful and fierce, with eyes like the night sky. Gizo saw her in the cage and claimed her for his harem. But Afi refused to break. She spat in his face during the night he tried to take her. Enraged, Gizo had her tied to a stake in the square, her body oiled and set alight as an example. Her screams echoed for what seemed like hours, and the Amazons danced around the flames, chanting praises to the king. Year after year, the raids on the Mahi continued. Gizo expanded his empire tenfold, capturing tens of thousands, selling most to the slave ships waiting at Ouida. The British tried to stop him, sending envoys like Captain Frederick Forbes in 1849, who begged the king to end the slave trade and the sacrifices. Gizo received him politely, offered him wine from an enemy skull cup, and said, "The slave trade is the ruling principle of my people. It is the source of their glory and wealth. Their songs celebrate their victories, and the mother lulls the child to sleep with notes of triumph over an enemy reduced to slavery." Forbes left empty-handed, haunted by the sights he had seen, piles of skulls, blood-stained altars, the empty eyes of the Amazons. But even kings like Gizo cannot escape fate. In 1858, after 40 years of rule, he fell in battle against the Yoruba, or so the official story goes. Some whisper he was poisoned by priests angry at his slow reforms, others say smallpox took him. His body was buried in secret, his palace sealed. The Amazons mourned him with one last great sacrifice, slaughtering hundreds more prisoners in his honor. Today the walls of Abumi stand as ruins, but the skulls are still there, embedded in the earth, silent witnesses to the horror. On quiet nights, when the wind blows through the palm trees, the old people in Benin say you can hear the whispers of the Mahi ghosts, the chiefs begging for their families, the wives crying for their lost daughters, the blood in the mortar calling for justice. Gizo built an empire on brutality, but empires crumble and bones remember. If you walk those paths at dusk, tread lightly. Because the king who paved his world with death might still be listening, sipping from his cup of skulls, waiting for the next raid to begin.